is I am going to actually solve it. Like I'm going to pretend like I didn't have choices and I'm going to solve for x, get x by itself. Well, this negative on the outside, you've got to consider is a negative 1. But since it's by a fraction, I'm going to make it a fraction. So now I distribute the negative 1 to everything over there. So that becomes negative 28x minus 12. On the bottom is a positive 1. Because isn't a negative 1 just a negative 1 over 1? So positive 1 times positive 8 is positive 8. Now, what do you think I need to do next? Right, we got to get that 8 out of the bottom. So you multiply by 8, which will cancel out on this side. Now, when you go over here to multiply by 8, you are multiplying everything that's already over there by 8. So you have to distribute it. So now that side becomes 8 times 6x, which is 48x. 8 times negative 30 is negative 240. But whenever you go to multiply this side by 8, you're multiplying everything on that side by 8. So you multiply the 8 by the 6x and the 8 by the negative 30. On this side, you now just have negative 28x minus 12. No, I just multiplied this side by 8. No, you can't. That's 8 over 1. So 8 over 1 times the 8 on bottom cancels out. Okay, so now we're going to combine like terms. I'm going to add the 28x, or actually no, I'm not going to do it that way. Hold on. You can do this 4 different ways. I'm going to start by subtracting the 48x over to this. So now I have negative 28 minus 48, which is negative what? 76x. And then bring down the minus 12 is less than negative 240. Now what do I do? Add 12. It'll cancel, and then you add it over here. So now I have negative 76x is less than negative 228, right? And now what do I do to solve for x? Right? And notice that we're dividing by a negative, and what's the rule with inequalities? Flip the sign because we divided by a negative, so x is greater than 3. Now, I am well aware that most of you would have trouble doing this successfully, okay, because that's a pretty complicated equation or inequality to solve. So, you could start by plugging in answers. But you do have to be careful because these are not equal signs, they're inequality signs. So when choice A says x is greater than 3, you would need to plug in a number greater than 3. And the first number greater than 3 is 4. So you would replace this x with a 4, and you would replace this x with a 4. So that'll look like this. Negative 28 times 4 plus 12 over 8 is less than 6 times 4 minus 30. Okay, so on the right side, we can pretty much just do that. What's 6 times 4? And 24 minus 30 is negative 6. On the left side, we're going to need to type this in. So go to your calculator. The first thing you want to type in is that negative sign, and then the parenthesis. And then we're about to type in a fraction. So alpha y equals number 1 for numerator over denominator. Now you're going to be typing in 28 times 4 plus 12. And then over 8. And then don't forget to put a parenthesis on the end. Now, some of you may look at that and be like, well, I don't really know what negative 31 over 2 is. You know what I mean? So you might want to change that to a decimal, and how could you do that? Well, couldn't you just type in negative 31 divided by 2? Or you can do alpha y equals number 4 and hit enter. And it's negative 15.5. Oops. So now let's read this statement. Negative 15.5 is less than negative 6. Is that true or false? True. Even though 15.5 is a bigger number than 6, when they're negative, it's actually smaller because it's further from 0, correct? So this, when you plugged in a number greater than 3, didn't it make a true statement? if you plugged in any of these other ones, like a number less than 3 or a number greater than -3 or less than -3, it would not have made, well, okay, this one obviously would work because or never mind, it wouldn't, because a number greater than 3 could be -2, right? And -2 might not work. You have to be greater than 3, okay? Any questions? Okay, let's continue in the EOC review packet. All right, we are on question number 40, which is page 15. It says a garden measuring 8 feet by 12 feet will have a walkway around it. Okay, so here's your garden. The garden measures 8 feet by 12 feet, and it says it has a walkway around it. Okay, there's your walkway. The walkway has a uniform width, which means it's the same width all the way around, even though mine doesn't appear to be. And the area covered by the garden and the walkway, so the area of the whole thing, is 192 square feet. How much is the area of just the garden? Right, because wouldn't you just do 12 times 8? Now, what do you think you do with those numbers? Hold on, this is divide 192 divided by 96, 2. They wanted to know the width of the walkway. So the width of the walkway is 2 feet all the way around. Yeah. Okay, number 41. Turn around and pay attention. The formula for the area of a circle is A equals pi r squared. Which equation shows the formula in terms of r? What does that mean in terms of r? Right, find out what r is, because look at all your choices. Don't all 4 choices have r by itself? So you're just trying to get r by itself. So start with the formula they gave you, and now how would we get that r by itself? What would we need to do first? Divide by pi. First you want to get the pi away from it, and it's being multiplied, so you divide it. So now we have a over pi equals r squared. And how do we get rid of the squared? Square root it. And so don't you just end up with r equals the square root of a over pi, which is choice C. All right, number 42. What are the solutions to the equation 2x squared minus 2x minus 12 equals 0? Okay, well, look at all your answer choices. All your answer choices are what? They're numbers, and they're equal to x. So don't you think you're just trying to figure out what numbers belong in the x? Okay, well, what's the easiest way to figure that out? You could, but there's an easier way. The easiest way is to graph it and look for the x-intercepts. Okay, if you graph this, 2x squared minus 2x minus 12, and you graph it, pay attention. See how it crosses the x-axis in 2 places at -2 and +3? So it's C. Now let me show you the way that Naya got it. She factored it by GCF. She noticed that all 3 of these terms can be divided by 2. So 2 is the GCF. You pull it out. When you factor it out, this becomes 1x squared minus 1x minus 6. Then you would factor by bubble method by looking for 2 numbers that multiply to make a -6, add to make a -1. That would be a 2 and a 3. But for them to add up to a -1, you would need the 3 to be the -1. And then remember, don't your final answers always become the opposite sign because you set it equal to 0 and solve and get -2 and +3? So that's the way you would have to do it if you did not have multiple choice, like if this were free response. But even if it wasn't multiple choice, can't you still graph it and know the answers? Emma. Okay, number 43. What are the solutions to the equation 6x squared minus x minus 40 equals 0? Does this look like one that you want to try to factor like we did last time? By what? Oh, you mean the A times C method? You could, but I would just graph it to save time. Okay, so 6x squared minus x minus 40. Okay, when we graph it, we see a parabola because it's a quadratic equation, and it crosses at -1, -2. What do you think? -2.4? Okay. And then the other one crosses at +1, +2 point. Okay. But all of our answers are in fraction form, so what should we do? Right, aren't all the choices 8/3 or 5/2? So let's figure out what 8/3 is as a decimal and 5/2. Okay, 8/3 is 2 point, but isn't it like 2.6666, so it would be 2.7? And what about 5/2? 2.5. Well, but remember, I'm not actually typing in the signs, I'm just typing in the fractions. We know, don't we know that one of the places it crossed the x-axis was negative and one was positive? So can't we cross out A because it's 2 negatives and C because it's 2 positives? Now we just got to figure out, is it the 8/3 that needs to be the negative or the 5/2? Right, don't you think that this 5/2, this was really 2.5? So that needs to be the negative and that needs to be the positive, which is D. All right, number 44. What are the solutions to the equation x squared minus 5x equals 14? What could we do here? What? You can, but there's a problem. And what is that problem? It's not set equal to 0. So what should we do? Right, just minus 14 over, and you'll have x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. Now graph it and look at where it crosses the x-axis. Let everybody have a chance to graph it before you yell out answers. Okay, where did it cross the x-axis? Right, 7 and -2, so C. Number 45, an object is thrown in the air with an initial velocity, that's speed, of 5 meters per second from a height of 9 meters. The equation h of t equals -4.9 t squared plus 5t plus 9 models the height of the object in meters after t seconds. About how many seconds does it take for the object to hit the ground? Round your answer to the nearest tenth of a second. So what do you think I should do here? Okay, we can graph it. Anytime you're not even sure where to start, I would at least graph it if it is possible to graph it. So y equals -4.9x squared plus 5x plus 9. Okay, remember when we see this picture, the scenario is an object is thrown into the air, and we're trying to figure out how long it will take for it to hit the ground. Well, remember, even though it shows, it doesn't understand when you graph this that the scenario is something being thrown into the air. So really, is this part of the parabola even there? Because that would be underground, right? So it starts here, it's thrown into the air, and then it comes and hits the ground at where? 2. Look, when it's back on the ground, isn't that at 2 for 2 seconds later? So, C. Yeah, it hit 2 seconds later. Okay, at 0 seconds, that's before it's left the ground though. Because remember, they said in the word problem that it's from a height of 9 meters to begin with. Okay, so whoever's throwing it is already 9 meters in the air, like on top of something. That's why the 0 says 9. You're trying to figure out how long it takes before it hits the ground. Well look, 1 second after it's been thrown, it's 9.1 meters in the air. By the second, it's showing below ground. But isn't that barely below ground? Negative 0.6 would be barely below ground. So don't you think it hit ground at like 1.9 seconds about? So, and that would round to 2. Now does that make sense to y'all? Okay, number 46. What explicit expression can be used to find the next term in this sequence? Okay, any ideas? Do you see a pattern? Right. She says you multiply by 2, which would, but no, if you first square it and then you multiply by 2. 2 squared is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times, that is the answer. You do multiply it by 2 and square it, but this is how I did it. Isn't this a sequence? So isn't 2 the first term and 8 is the second term? And 18 is the third term, and so on. So I just plugged in 1. Like when I plug in 1, right, okay, if I take the first one and I plug in 1, 2 times 1 is 2. So it works so far. But when I plug in 2, is 2 times 2 going to give me 8? So that one doesn't work. And then you could try it with this one, and it wouldn't work. But then when you try it with this one, which is where you square it, when you plug in a 2 for the second term, 2 squared is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. When you plug in a 3 for the third term, 3 squared is 9, 9 times 2 is 18. When you plug in a 4, 4 squared is 16, 16 times 2 is 32. When you plug in a 5, 5 squared is 25, 25 times 2 is 50. So what would the sixth term be? $72. Because you would do 6 squared, which is 36, and then 36 times 2 is 72. Look what else you could do. You could graph each one, and look what happens when you get to choice C's graph. Y equals 2n squared. Or not even so much the graph, the table is what you care about. Look. 1, 2, 2, 8, 3, 18, 4, 32. Weren't those the numbers you had? 2, 8, 18, 32, and then 50. So that's another way to do it if you're not sure how to plug in. Graph each one, look at the table, and see which one produces those y values. All right, number 47. The function s of t equals vt plus h minus 0.5 at squared represents the height of an object, s, from the ground after the time t, when the object is thrown with an initial velocity of v at an initial height of h, where a is the acceleration due to gravity, 32 feet per second squared. A baseball player hits a baseball 4 feet above the ground with an initial velocity of 80 feet per second. About how long will it take the baseball to hit the ground? Okay, this is what I would do first. Yeah. On the equation, which is s of t equals vt plus h minus 0.5 at squared. Now with that equation, try to focus on where you can fill in the numbers that were given, 32, 4, and 80. Any idea where the 32 could go? Where? Guys, read and tell me where you think 32 would go. The A. A is the acceleration due to gravity, 32 feet per second squared. So I'm going to put a 32 there, and then that will just come down beside it, and the t squared will come down beside it. What do you think where do you think we could put the 4? H for height. 4 feet above ground would be the height. And then what do you think we could put in V? 80. Now you just need to graph this. Go to y equals and graph that. Yeah, like it wants to know how long will it take the baseball to hit the ground. So when did the baseball fall back to the ground? About 5 seconds later. Does everybody see that on your graph? Yeah. All right, number 48. A cafe's annual income depends on X, which is the number of customers. The function I of X equals 4X squared minus 20X describes the cafe's total annual income. The function C of X equals 2X squared plus 5 describes the total amount the cafe spends in a year. The cafe's annual profit, which is P of X, is the difference between the annual income and the amount spent in a year. So what do? Just subtract them. 4X squared minus 2X squared is, and then don't you pretty much know the answer? But then doesn't minus 20X just come down because there's nothing else to combine it with? But you don't just bring down a plus 5 because remember you're subtracting. So subtract 5 is why it ends up being minus 5. So A. What? Yeah, and those were the only like terms, so these two just came down, but the 5 got a minus on it because we're subtracting it. Number 49, which statement best describes the graph of f of x plus 6? Does that shift it up, left, right, or down? Left. Remember, this is what would shift it up, like that. That's up. This would shift it down. If the number is at the very end, it's up or down. If the number is with the x, it's horizontal, and it's opposite of what you would think. Plus is actually left, and minus is actually right. And that's because in the equation, there's already a minus built into the formula there. So when you put a negative beside it, it makes it positive. When you put a positive number beside it, the positive number now looks like it's got a minus beside it because the minus was already there. Okay, 50. Which of these is an even function? Does anybody remember last week when I was teaching you about even and odd functions, what the rules for even functions are? Even functions are symmetric to the y-axis, and their end behavior behaves the same way. Like on the ends of the graph, both ends go up or both ends go down. Odd is when they behave in opposite ways. So you just graph all 4 and see which one fits that criteria. So quickly do it. Graph all of them, see which one is symmetric to the y-axis, and their ends behave the same way. You can, but it gets a little busy on your graph.